Okay, thanks everyone for coming. I know it's quite early, but I really appreciate it. So I'm an integrated modeler, and I'm trying to integrate things at the very high level, so across disciplines. And I guess it was only a matter of time before I ventured even further into, I guess, the geeky side of things. So just to get a bit of a feel of my audience, I'm going to show you some pictures for a second. It's a trip down memory lane. But raise your hands if these pictures look familiar to you. Yeah, we have a few. Yeah, quite a few. What about this one? Yeah, a lot more. And so it's pretty clear that from all these different examples of games that this whole idea of games or the media of games is quite ubiquitous in our everyday lives. In fact, a lot of people, over 1 billion people now play games worldwide, and games themselves, about $65 billion are spent annually on games. This has actually since increased since 2014. And it's set to double to about $120 billion worth of investments in the development of computer games. And it's really become a new form of communication, driven by a lot of major advancements in the computational and graphics technologies. Games themselves are thought-provoking. They allow people to solve interesting problems and also engage them at an emotional level. It's really important to notice that a lot of us have grown up with games, and really the millennial generation that I'm part of, we're entering the workforce now having learned a lot from playing these games in our childhood. So why not start considering these as important medias for engaging people, just like we use books or videos or audio. And there have been curiosities about the use of games in a non-entertainment setting, so for engaging practitioners or the community. And really, when you start seeing papers, researchers considering using some of these games for, actually learning a bit more about how we can better plan cities, why not? The timing is really right in urban drainage management because over the last decade we've seen greater integration. There's been more breaking down of the different silos in administration as well as in disciplines. With the rise of decentralized technologies and their greater use, we're seeing greater complexity in trying to manage our urban water systems. We're starting to realize the multiple objectives and benefits of these systems, and in doing so, forging greater collaboration within stakeholders and with the community. There's more sharing of responsibilities and costs, or at least we are trying to figure out how to better manage our systems through these kinds of methods. And also greater awareness. With livability being a buzzword now in our cities, we have communities who want to have greener and nicer cities to live in. And planning this is quite a complex task. So really what I'm trying to explore in this new project, which a lot of us have been working on, we have quite an interdisciplinary team at Monash, and that may also expand globally, which I'm really excited about, is what is the potential for serious gaming in urban drainage management or integrated urban water management, but also how might we build an effective game. So the actual work we've been doing over the last 7 months in trying to frame this new generation has been quite broad. So we conducted 97 semi-structured interviews with water practitioners across Australia. So interviews, they went for about 80 minutes, and we talked about a range of topics, including really how does the planning process currently look like? What are some of the barriers and challenges? What's the collaboration like? We gave the interviewees a chance to envision the ideal worlds. So imagine you had unlimited resources and the power to influence. What would your ideal management structures look like, and how would you design your ideal world? And we also looked at the potential of digital or board games. We asked practitioners to relate to some of the games which they thought were very similar to the work they do. In addition to this, we also looked at some existing examples in the entertainment industry, as well as the serious gaming literature, as well as gamification. I should note, serious games and gamification are two very different things, even though people tend to consider them as the same, but they're actually quite different. But we drew upon some frameworks from the game design literature and the study of games, known as ludology, to try and better understand what's really involved in building these kinds of games. And finally, we also revisited the current methodologies for building serious games. Now, in the interest of time, I want to only focus on a few key things. So I thought it might be interesting to give you a bit of an insight into how geeky our Australian practitioners are, but also on a more serious note, no pun intended, what they think of the potential of games in both a professional setting and to engage communities. And we'll then revisit a methodology that we hope to then adopt in a more systematic way to build a game of our own. So, when asked what kind of games they've come across in the entertainment industry that reminds them of their work, here are some of the insights of what practitioners said. So the two most mentioned games are SimCity and Minecraft. So sandbox games where you're building your own virtual world and you get to see many intricate interactions, but also the bigger picture. Minecraft was often related to a digital version of Lego, which I'm sure a lot of you have also grown up with, which is where the familiarity comes from. We also had some mentions of puzzle and strategy games. This idea of being able to assemble resources, manage them effectively, and then make decisions, either on the fly, such as in games like Age of Empires, where you have to make it in real time and you have limitations in a lot of areas, and you have to achieve your objectives. Or in turn-based games like Civilization, which is more like chess, where you're trying to anticipate your opponent's moves. And then we had the more unique examples. So someone mentioned Mortal Kombat. I think it was to voice his frustration about how it feels like to deal with stakeholders in the industry sometimes. And someone actually mentioned Battlefield 1942, which is interesting when you listen to their reasoning, because you are placed in a multiplayer environment. You're working with a team of people you don't necessarily know much about, but you have a common objective that you have to try and solve, and you have an open world that you have to try and understand and navigate. So it was very interesting having a chat with them about their, I guess, childhood memories, but also current memories. A lot of them still play games as well. But on a more serious note, here's some actual insights into what they thought about using games in a professional setting. So an engineering consultant from Melbourne made an interesting point that games, the fun element of games is quite crucial. And it's a way of bringing people together. And if you can add fun to the picture, then people will bond more as a result. Informal communication was a very interesting topic in many of the discussions, where often a lot of the innovation emerges in, Friday night beers or just chats down the hallway. And it's that relaxed atmosphere that can help potentially engage people more and also create these new ideas. One person was very attracted to virtual reality and the latest tech, but I think he also raised a very important point, which was, would we call them games? Do we associate this element of play with work? And how do we actually mix the two without, how do we get people to take it seriously? Someone else was more critical of the short-term impact that games may have. But given it is the buzzword of the day, that it may be a very good way of engaging people and gaining traction in actually coming up with innovations in the industry. But to summarize, there was a lot of excitement from different viewpoints as well, because games are new, they're different. It's unlike the models that we currently use in our industry. These games, they just have a completely different nature and feel to them. The ability to get visual real-time feedback on decision choices that you make in games. Imagine we built a SimCity for urban drainage management. To be able to test ideas in a risk-free environment, or to step into someone else's shoes. So if we defined roles and gave a developer the role of a water utility, how could they actually then build an understanding? That potential was recognized. And as a community engagement tool, games was seen as very, very important, given the fun element, but also the fact that it can essentially dumb down pretty complex processes into a very visual illustration of what was going on in an environment. There was some doubt, the short-term appeal being one of them, the gimmicky nature of games. In local government in particular, where time is of essence, there was concern that because people are time poor, games may just be a time waster. Given the industry is quite risk averse, and we've heard that several times in talks today, there was a few aspects there, such as the learning curve for games being too great, or people losing the plot eventually because it's just the game in the end. or gaming the game itself, and there being no real impact despite all the efforts. And finally, an age limitation was also raised, but some of the people who have been in the industry for quite some time actually expressed quite keen interest. So when we revisited the process of how we would build a serious game, we looked at many different frameworks, but eventually found that if we took 5 key steps in our research and in engaging people, I think this would be quite effective and cover all the grounds. We would have to begin by defining really what the objectives are. Just like in modeling, you want to make sure you know what your audience is, your user base, and then choose whether you are going to engage a large crowd or a smaller focus group. You would design your game, your experiment, the user engagement, your virtual world. And this is quite crucial, and you'll see shortly, I'll touch upon this briefly, that there are so many more elements than just traditional modeling, model development. You develop the game, the software, the user experience, the way you gather your data. Unlike the entertainment industry, you add a whole new element to serious gaming, which is the collection of data. Then you deploy the game. Now, whether this is in playtesting or whether this is for real, you would need to get your game out to the players and collect the information, engage them through the process, make sure they understand how to use the game. And this can be quite iterative with design, because through playtesting you may find that you need to revise the way you present the information so that people can learn it quicker. But finally, and this is often the most forgotten step in the research, is debriefing. Serious gaming, apart from entertainment and really engaging users, has the added value of really understanding how decisions are made, how people think, how people perceive the environments you give them. And this needs to be done a lot more, and this is something we'll definitely have to look into when we build a game of our own. And this can often lead to a redefinition of your objectives in the first place. So to touch upon briefly, in game development, when you're looking at the game mechanics and the engine that you're using, you're taking player inputs and you're giving them feedback. And really underlying a lot of this are submodels. But the process is a lot more involved, because other than the submodels that you'll need to bring in the science into the simulation, you want to make sure that that is coupled with the audiovisual feedback, that you're actually tracking the progress as the player proceeds through the game. Fortunately, we have a lot of packages that can enable us to actually speed up the process, like physics engines or lighting to get the visuals right. A lot of components available to build our environments. So hopefully speed up the process. It is challenging though. Visual style becomes very important as well, and there are many different ways you could present a game. From the impressions we get from the industry, it seems like the more photorealistic or low poly or even conceptualized environments may be suitable, and that the impression is if you went a text-based route that we'd end up where we've been modeling for decades. So different considerations for each, but hopefully we'll get there. If anything, a lot of variables to consider, but there are really 3 take-home messages from the initial bit of work that we've done that I'd like you to remember. One is there is definitely potential, and not only as an industry engagement, but also as a research tool, given the willingness of people to participate. Design, quite important. Keep it simple, with visuals being quite crucial, and it's very player-centric, unlike our traditional modeling approaches. It's not just the model, there's a lot more to it, and what's important is also making sure you consolidate the information thereafter. So this is a larger, longer-term project. We are going to be exploring a few options in the water-sensitive urban design and integrated water management space, but if you're interested, you can have a speak to me, or I also did an interview on a YouTube series. You can have a watch of that as well. But thank you everyone for your time, and hope you enjoyed this.